This video is brought to you guys ad-free. Not because I want to bring it to you ad-free, but because YouTube won't let me monetize it, even if I limit my clip selection to only the clips that air on network television and are monetized elsewhere on the platform. Thanks, YouTube. One of the things that I've been trying to emphasize throughout this channel, and I talk about it every now and again, is skepticism of democratic institutions. That's not to say that democracy or democratic institution or democratic representation isn't important in certain areas. I am definitely in favor of a body like the House of Representatives. In general, obviously, not this particular House of Representatives, because it is important that the people's voice be heard when it comes to government. However, it's very important to limit the will and whims of the majority in order to protect the rights of the minority. And the reason this is important is because we have this idea in this country that if you put the word democratic in front of something inherently evil or oppressive, then that somehow nerfs the evil and oppressive nature of that particular policy or ideology. The best example of this is this idea of democratic socialism. Socialism is one of the most oppressive systems ever created in the history of the world, if not the most oppressive system ever created in the history of the world. Putting the word democratic in front of it or having popular support for that oppression does not somehow transform that system and make it moral. And people tend to understand this when you use other words in substitute for socialism. Like if you said democratic slavery, people would not support slavery just because you put the word democratic in front of it, even though throughout the history of the world, the majority of people believed in an institution just like that. And if you were to poll people on whether or not you should keep captured enemies as servants or slaves, the majority of people throughout the history of the world, provided that they weren't currently at that very moment being forced into servitude, would have probably said, yes, this is a moral system. Remember, the abolition of slavery was something that came about in England. For the majority of the history of the world, this was the norm until some people in England decided that this was immoral and they had a moral imperative to root it out across their own empire. Slavery was practiced in Africa. It still is in Africa. In Asia, it was practiced in the Americas prior to Columbus landing in 1492. This was the norm everywhere for thousands of years. Every major religious book, within the Abrahamic faith, all have chapters or at least portions that describe how to treat your slaves. That's how ingrained in human society this practice was prior to the English deciding somewhere around the 1800s that the practice needed to be changed. Now, the reason I'm spelling this out for you, giving you all this prelude prior to talking about what the Atlanta DA is doing when it comes to the Rayshard Brooks case, is because it's important to know that one of the institutions I am the most skeptical of when it comes to elected office are judiciary or prosecutorial positions, because the law should not be enforced by the whims of a democratic process. Law should be passed by the whims of democratic process. You should be able to elect your representatives in order to have them advocate for those laws, but justice should be blind. That's why we symbolize justice as a blind woman holding a scale traditionally in the United States and throughout the Western world, because the law should not change subject to the mob or to the electoral politics of a particular enforcer of that law. Now, before I continue to sway you with my charm, charisma, wit, and unparalleled intelligence on this platform, I do want to take the time to thank you guys for your response to the overly censored video, which was the last video I published on this channel. Obviously, the explanation of the circumstances from that video were preceding that video, so if you want to know what I'm talking about, check that out. But the response and the support that I got on Patreon, Subscribestar, Venmo, and PayPal was absurd, and I really appreciate it. And just for reference, the uncensored version of that video is up for free, so you do not have to pay to see it on Patreon or Subscribestar. As I pointed out in that video and in the pinned comments of that video, I'm still trying to give you guys every piece of content that I produce for free. Patreon, Subscribestar, and the join button, those are just early access to those videos. It's not exclusive access, it's just early. But thank you guys so much anyway. And thank you to User Exquisite for the $50 Sonnen level Subscribestar tier. That's way too much money, but I am incredibly grateful for it, and I'm honored that you pledged that much money. But also, Like, revise that pledge down a little bit. That's way too much money. Alright, let's get back into the Rayshard Brooks case. Now, around a week ago, I don't really care about the exact date because it's not that relevant, there was a police stop in Atlanta, Georgia in a Wendy's parking lot where they found one Rayshard Brooks sleeping in his car in the drive-thru. Obviously, this created an obstruction for people that were trying to order food, and obviously sleeping in your car is very odd, so the police were called to check the situation out and assess Rayshard Brooks' status, and unsurprisingly, Rayshard Brooks had been driving while intoxicated. Now, he did claim that he was there because somebody dropped him off in the drive-thru line in the driver's side of the car, but honestly, that's neither here nor there because there's actually video of him driving his car into the parking space, and that is drinking while driving. So even in that small instance where you move your car to a parking space, if you're behind the wheel, that's a DWI. Also, on top of that, most states have some version of a key in the ignition law, which basically states that if you are in the driver's seat while heavily intoxicated, and the key is in the ignition, or if you have a push button start, the car is turned on, then that is enough to constitute a DWI charge because the police don't actually have to wait for you to take off in the car and put others at risk in order to charge you. This is why when I get drunk and I've driven my car to that location, I always sleep in the passenger side seat with the ignition on and the air conditioner on or the heat on, depending on what time of the season it is. It's just smart legal theory and a little bit of a tip for you guys who might like to sleep in your car when you're horrifically drunk.
Hey, sir. You right? Dude, you're sitting in the drive-thru line here. Blah, 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 stop.
Now, after 2 attempts to wake up the passed out Brooks, he finally wakes up and he moves the car to the parking space, where he then engages in about a 20 to 25 minute conversation where he lies an insane amount of times in an insane amount of ways in order to try to avoid the inevitable DUWI arrest. Now, eventually the police are able to determine that Brooks is drunk. Honestly, they knew it all along, and they make the move to arrest him. And while I generally have a policy of not bringing up somebody's previous criminal history when it's not germane to the case, that obviously doesn't apply when their previous criminal history is germane to the case. Brooks, being on probation, decided that he was not going to be taken by these officers without a fight. So immediately at the point where the officer was attempting to handcuff Brooks, Brooks starts violently resisting, and he ends up doing quite a bit of damage to both officers. He clearly bodies both of them, he tanks a taser shot, and he ends up stealing one of the officer's tasers prior to him taking off. Brooks runs away, the officer pursues with his gun drawn, and then Brooks turns and fires the taser at the officer's head. At the moment the taser is discharged, the officer fires quickly 3 shots that end up striking and eventually killing Brooks. However, it's important to note that after striking Brooks, the officer immediately went over to him and began to apply first aid as the ambulance came on. The reason this is important is because these are the indisputable facts of the case as demonstrated by the video evidence. However, the Atlanta District Attorney, who is currently facing a steep uphill battle in his re-election campaign, is actively lying about almost every single detail that I've laid out to you and is provably true by the video evidence. The Atlanta DA made the absurd claim that Brooks was peaceably sleeping in his vehicle.
Mr. Brooks never presented himself as a threat. At the very beginning, he was peacefully sleeping in his car.
Again, in reality, and as captured by the video, he was drunk and passed out. The Atlanta DA also claims that Brooks was in no way a threat to the officers.
Mr. Brooks, on the night of this incident, was calm, he was cordial, and really displayed a cooperative nature. Secondly, even though Mr. Brooks was slightly impaired, his demeanor during this incident was almost jovial.
In reality, you can see on the video him violently assault the officers, retrieve one of their weapons, and then attempt to fire that weapon in order to make contact with the officers, going above the officer's head, which also translates to firing very close to the officer's head. This is critical information because the officer fired at the time that the taser was deployed at him offensively. So the gunshots were a defensive action against a risk to his life or serious bodily injury. And the Atlanta DA has no problem calling a taser a deadly weapon when it suits him, like 2 weeks ago when he was charging cops with using a taser on people in a car that were leaving riots in Atlanta.
Aggravated assault, and this is for pointing a taser at Mrs. Pilgrim. And as many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon.
The district attorney, who I believe's title is the Fulton County District Attorney, Paul L. Howard, also made absurd claims and allegations against the officer that both were inconsistent with other claims made in the case, like a taser not being a deadly weapon, and were also inconsistent with the video footage. And I'm talking specifically about the kicking allegation that the officer allegedly did post-shooting Rayshard Brooks. He released a still image that was supposedly indicative of this hateful kick by the officer, and he claimed that the make and model of the boot the officer was wearing made that shoe a dangerous weapon.
Officer Roth actually kicked Mr. Brooks while he laid on the ground, while he was there fighting for his life.
Meanwhile, he claimed previously that Rayshard Brooks, who fired a taser at this very same officer's head, was not a threat to the officer because the taser's not a deadly weapon, and because him firing that shot and missing his head thus made the taser's usability unusable after that. Meanwhile, the officer shot him right as the taser was firing, so that's neither here nor there. But the district attorney held these absurd conclusions. Now, when I saw this still in an incident that is largely covered by video, and this still is from a video that was not released, I immediately knew that the officer did not kick Brooks. I knew that it's standard operating procedure in most police departments to turn somebody over after they've been shot to check on them. And I thought that's what the officer was doing. And the reason you use your leg and you don't bend down and push him over with your arms is because you're not sure at the damage the gunshots did at that moment, so you're trying to protect yourself. Also, this little karate move that the officer was using is not at all what it looks like. That's actually the officer grabbing his radio, which is right where that hand is reaching, to radio for help for Mr. Brooks while he's checking on him. And the great thing about the claims that I'm making in this video that contrasts what the district attorney is saying in his video announcement, which was obviously a political propaganda maneuver in order to boost his reelection and obscure the fact that he's currently facing corruption charges, is that what I say is actually backed up by evidence. And credit to ML Christensen for digging up this surveillance video. I will link his video and explanation down in the comments, because even though I did ask people to send this to me and I was going to go through the videos, ML Christensen already did the work for me, so why not steal what he did? You can actually see via the Wendy's surveillance tape when the only moment possible that this still could have actually come from. And guess what? It is not at all in any way, shape, or form from the video an aggressive kick. And the reason you know this video is from this moment is because the video had to be taken from inside a car. And post this moment, there are no other instances where the officer is making that motion while a car has that view to capture that video of the officer. So the district attorney flat out lied provably in this instance, and that's not the only lie that is clearly disprovable by the video. He also said that they didn't try to help him, which is absolutely ridiculous because we have body cam footage and audio from that body cam footage, and I'll just play it for you, and you tell me if this is indicative of an officer showing absolutely no concern for the life of a suspect.
Breathing. Mr. Brooks, keep breathing for me.
What is going on in this case is absolutely criminal, and let me be 100% clear and unambiguous for those people who are having trouble following along at this point in the video. I'm attributing 0% of that criminality to either of the officers involved in this instance. All of the criminality is reserved for Brooks, and especially the district attorney for Fulton County. Because he is politicizing this, he has skipped over the normal process. Normally, when you have use of force allegations, it is referred to the GBI, which is a system put in place in order to hold officers accountable due to the fact that they might have close personal relationships and political conflicts of interest with local district attorneys. The Fulton County DA skipped over that process because he wanted to charge as soon as possible in order to get all of the press attention. And obviously, the 11 charges that he attached to the officer are all completely false and clearly politically motivated. As I said, according to Georgia law, this is a good shoot. But again, to buttress my original thesis from the beginning of this video, these are the kind of politically motivated outcomes you come to expect when you have elected officials in positions of power that should not be subject to the whims of the mob. People burned down the Wendy's after this instance, as if Wendy's was at fault for Rayshard Brooks resisting arrest, stealing the officer's taser, and trying to shoot the officer in the head with that taser. It's absolutely ridiculous, and rather than being the top cop that the district attorney is supposed to actually be, rather than enforcing the law against the criminals who destroyed that business for no reason, the district attorney decided to side with the criminals and commit crimes, in my opinion, charging the officer in a case that he knows cannot stand up in any court of law whatsoever. It is patently absurd, and it's disgusting, honestly. So while I like to make a video where I mock the Young Turks' reaction to this case because I am certain it is lacking all forms of intelligence, or I'd like to make fun of Trevor Noah's awful take on this case where he's trying to weasel out of the facts of the case, the reality is the district attorney holds more institutional power in this situation, and he is using this to attack the officer in order to boost his own electoral prospects. And people need to come out against this kind of thing, and they need to come out against the censorious nature that major corporations are putting up around cases like this, and specifically around this specific case. Like the mortgage brokerage firm that ended up firing Officer Rolf's stepmother because on a personal social media account, she supported the person that she considers to be her son, who is her son in every way but biology. She is 100% right to support him, not only morally because that is her close relative, but also factually because the officer acted appropriately, and if there was a legitimate case to make against this officer, then you wouldn't have to lie so much about the circumstances of this case in order to make it. Now, in response to this, the Atlanta PD had what is called a sick out, where a lot of officers called out sick just prior to their shifts in order to protest this overreach by the district attorney, which was clearly done for political purposes. And a lot of people on the left started attacking them because they were like, well, the Atlanta PD, they're doing this sick out in order to protest a criminal cop. First of all, as established and laid out throughout this case, the cop is in no way, shape, or form a criminal. And second of all, if you're in favor of largely defunding the police or abolishing the police because you believe the police don't prevent crimes, then you can't also hold the position that the police doing a sick out and being absent, giving you what you want, is a bad thing. Either you're in favor of getting rid of the police because they don't prevent crime, or the police doing a sick out is a bad thing because there's no police to fight against crime. But again, this was never about the police committing crimes. This was about the police preventing people from committing crimes. These people are pro-criminal. Everything in their actions show us that repeatedly. Look at the way that they bullied this police officer out of the Rayshard Brooks Memorial, where there was a shooting, preventing the officer from responding to a shooting at this vigil.
Never stand right here, you don't. Get your white face out of here. You gotta do something tonight. Get your ass out of here. You gonna leave this man alone. I just said leave this man alone. Who needs some help right now? They don't shot somebody. Let him come in here and help.
They bullied him out because he was the wrong skin color, which shows you the kind of character of this supposedly anti-racist movement. And even this woman who's at the vigil is looking at the people that she's surrounded by and noticing how absurd and ridiculous they're acting, because in this instance, she's smart enough to realize they do need the police. There was literally a shooting at this vigil, but the mob is not satiated because the mob does not care about preventing crime because the overarching goal is to protect and excuse criminality. But those are just my thoughts. They happen to be the correct thoughts and they happen to be literal facts. But if you disagree with me, feel free to leave your wrong opinion down in the comments below. As you guys know the drill, you can like, share, and subscribe if you like the video, want to share it, and want to see more of the video. You can support me with the support links in the description box. You can subscribe to me on my BitChute channel or through the various membership programs that exist. I don't like repeating all this. You guys know the drill. You can look in the links. It's totally fine. Till next time.